Mr. President.
The Senator from New Mexico.
Mr. President, I understand we are on the motion to proceed.
We are actually in a quorum call.
I'd ask unanimous consent the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I understand we're debating a motion to proceed to S-2343, the Stop the Student Loan Interest Rate Hike Act of 2012. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Mr. President, I came to the floor to urge my colleagues to vote to proceed to this important legislation. I was disappointed to see that many of my Republican colleagues voted against allowing debate and amendment on this legislation. I've heard senators from both sides of the aisle acknowledge the need to prevent the July 1 rate increase on the Stafford loans, the subsidized loans. So it's difficult to understand their unwillingness to even consider the bill and have a thoughtful debate and an opportunity for amendment, which will allow us to keep these interest rates low for college students in all of our states. Members may disagree about the best way to pay for keeping rates at 3.4%. But we need to go ahead and proceed to the legislation and pass legislation to accomplish this. If senators have different proposals, they can offer them. But by blocking debate, we obviously cannot get to a solution on this problem. The Democrats have proposed to pay for the legislation by closing a tax loophole that people use to avoid paying Social Security and Medicare taxes. That is the so-called S-corporation payroll tax loophole. This proposal would close the loophole for S-corporations for which 75% of the corporation's income is attributable to the services of 3 or fewer shareholders. This loophole allows, for example, an individual lawyer or a lobbyist to set up an S-corporation to make millions of dollars in fees and to not pay payroll taxes on nearly all of that income. All he has to do is to give himself a cash dividend from the corporation instead of paying himself wages. And this is not a fair arrangement. To be clear, not all small businesses are gaming the system in this way and are not permitted to game the system in this way. This loophole is not available to businesses that are organized as sole proprietorships or as partnerships. Those small businesses are paying their fair share of taxes. By contrast to this way of paying for the continuation of the low interest on student loans, my Republican colleagues have opted for a very different approach. They offset the cost by using the Prevention and Public Health Fund. In my view, this is a misguided approach. The Prevention Fund is not a slush fund, as it has been called by many. Instead, it is a fund used to help reduce chronic disease, such as diabetes and heart disease, and to fund immunization programs for children. This is a critical fund that's used to lower long-term health costs to improve health outcomes. In my view, eliminating this fund would simply increase health risks and ultimately increase health care costs in this country. It's very clear that Democrats and Republicans have a fundamental difference in our approach to how we should maintain student loan interest rates. However, as I said before, it is important we get to the bill. We proceed to vote for cloture on this bill so we can discuss a path forward and consider amendments if individual senators wish to propose amendments. Preparing students for an education is essential for this country's global competitiveness. It is imperative we provide students the tools they need to succeed in this very fast-changing economy. This includes access to a high-quality education which will enable us to train the next generation of Americans for jobs in high technology fields. Mr. President, I spoke to a luncheon that was put on by a foundation that supports one of our community colleges in New Mexico this last Tuesday. And it's clear that we have many students who are working very hard to make ends meet and to stay in school so that they can obtain the skills they need to earn a good wage, to pursue a constructive career. And there are many areas of our economy where these types of trained workers are needed. One area which is obvious in my state and nationwide is in health care. We need to train more nurses. One statistic I used in this talk last Tuesday was that over the next 8 years now, between now and 2020, we are going to have to add 700,000 more nurses to the health care field in this country to meet the needs of the baby boom generation. And in addition to those 700,000, we're going to have to hire an additional 500,000 just to replace those who retire from the nursing profession. So we've got 1.2 million nurses are going to have to be hired in this country over the next 8 years. We need to train those people. There are many young people in this country who would like to have that training. They need student loans in order to be able to cover the cost of that training, and that's why this is such an important debate. Student loan debt has, for the first time in our history, surpassed credit card debt. Today, this debt exceeds $1 trillion. The average college graduate leaves school with more than $25,000 in loans. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, college costs at state schools are rising and have been rising at an alarming rate. These increased costs far outpace the increased cost of medical care. We are often giving speeches here on this Senate floor about the high increase, the excessive increase in medical care costs. In fact, the cost of college for many students is rising even faster. The same thing can be said about gasoline. I see my colleagues rush to the floor whenever the price of gasoline begins moving up, and with good reason. It is a major burden on U.S. families and Americans everywhere. But these costs pale, the growth in these costs pale in comparison to the growth that we are seeing in the cost of education. The cost of tuition and fees has nearly sextupled since 1985. This is particularly troublesome for students from low-income families. If we allow interest rates to double, there are 7.4 million students nationwide who will see an increase in the cost of their student loans beginning on the 1st of July. This has a direct impact on students and on families because subsidized Stafford loans are need-based, and they are typically designed and focused on helping low and moderate income students. In my state of New Mexico, about 40,000, the specific number I've been given is 39,875, but about 40,000 students will see an increase in interest rates if we do not take action before the 1st of July. There are nearly 10,000 undergraduates at New Mexico State University who will feel the effects of doubling rates. And there are thousands of students at the University of New Mexico who will also see these increases. This is true of our smaller schools in New Mexico as well. The school I was speaking at last week was Eastern New Mexico University in Roswell. There are 222 students there who took out Stafford student loans during this current academic year. The Department of Education estimates that the average student would pay as much as an additional $1,000 per year for their student loans unless we can keep this interest rate where it is. Not only would incoming students be affected, current students would also feel the increase as they originate a new loan for the new academic year. The additional burden on our students would be substantial. Students and families understand the additional increase in costs. In the last few weeks, I've been hearing from constituents all over my state asking us to prevent this rate increase. One student from Gallup, New Mexico wrote to me saying, quote, "Give a break to the future of this country and to the millions of students and families who need the relief from the debt of college." Another family in Albuquerque wrote to me saying, quote, "I write to urge you to vote so that student loan interest rates do not go up. In this recession, more than ever, people of all ages are depending on education as a means of gaining employment and depending at least in part on student loans," end quote. So our constituents are asking us to take action. By doing so, we can continue to provide students with stability as they enter and complete their education. A high-quality educational system unleashes the potential of our students, and we need world-class problem solvers and thinkers if we are going to remain competitive. By investing in American students, we can grow our economy and build the middle class. Let's move ahead with consideration of this bill. If a majority of senators wish to change the way the bill is paid for, then we can consider that amendment. But we should not refuse to allow the bill to come to the Senate floor for debate and amendment. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor today, as I have week after week since the health care law has been passed, with a doctor's second opinion about the law that that I have great concerns with. And I do that as a doctor who practiced medicine for 25 years, took care of families all around Wyoming, was involved with a number of different programs aimed at prevention of disease, early detection of disease, early treatment of disease. So I come to the floor today to talk specifically about a portion of the health care law that's been discussed quite a bit in the last week or two on this Senate floor. Congress has talked a lot about the so-called Prevention and Public Health Fund, which is included in the President's health care law. And, you know, when I looked at this health care law initially and continue to look at it today, I continue to ask the question, does this health care law the best to give patients the care they need from a doctor that they want at the cost they can afford? And I believe it has failed on so many ways to do that, which is why I continue to work to try to repeal and replace this health care law. But when we get to the specifics of this public health fund and prevention fund, the President and Democrats have claimed that the purpose of the fund, the purpose was to promote wellness, prevent disease, and protect against public health emergencies. Well, all of us want to promote wellness, prevent disease, and protect against public health emergencies. I know how important those things are as a doctor. I know how important it is to the point that for over 2 decades in Wyoming, I was medical director of a program called the Wyoming Health Fairs, where we have provided low-cost health care screenings to people all across the Cowboy State. It's a very important program, and people continued to write letters to me over the decades. The fact that by going to a health fair, by learning about how to prevent diseases, by early detection of problems, they feel that either they or members of their families have had their lives saved as a result of these services that were provided all throughout the communities, aimed at prevention, aimed at early detection of problems. Tests like blood pressure, PSA test, people learning about how to examine themselves, how to get a mammogram, a low-cost or free mammogram, all of these things aimed at giving people information for prevention. And these gave people the tools that they need, to make decisions about their health and their health care, and not just the patient, but also to help their medical providers. So I come to the floor today to say that instead of helping Americans prevent health problems, the President's new law actually uses this so-called prevention fund as a Washington slush fund. In fact, the new health law provided about $15 billion for this fund from 2010 to 2019, and then beyond that, about $2 billion every year in annual appropriation of funds received to go toward this same slush fund forever. $2 billion a year forever. Who's going to control the fund? Well, the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And even though this law has only been in place now for 2 years, we've already witnessed how the Obama administration officials have allowed this money to be wasted. Among other things, we hear of a health clinic using the funding to spay and neuter pets. That's right, to spay and neuter pets. Another state's Department of Health used $3.6 million to create at least 4 regional food policy councils. And taxpayers are going to be happy to learn, not so happy, of course, to learn that their hard-earned money helped the one county in California secure a ban on new fast food restaurants. Well, you know, nothing against a food policy or spaying or neutering pets, but when the United States government is borrowing approximately 40 cents out of every dollar that we spend, when we have a national debt in the area of $15 trillion, Washington should not waste Americans' hard-earned taxpayer dollars, but we continue to do it, and this fund is a key example. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, eliminating the prevention fund would save about $13.5 billion over the next 10 years. The fact is, Congress already funds many prevention programs with a proven track record of success. Examples include cancer prevention, tobacco prevention, a host of other problems. So Republicans have supported and will continue to support these critical prevention programs: cancer prevention, tobacco prevention, working on heart disease. However, the record is clear that the so-called prevention fund in the health care law is wasteful and duplicative. It doesn't help the people stay well or become well. Now, Senator Alexander from Tennessee has introduced legislation that would eliminate this slush fund and use the savings to maintain student loan interest rates at 3.8%. Under current law, students who receive subsidized Stafford student loans will see their rates increase shortly to 6.8%. Now, unless, of course, Congress acts, and I'm ready to act. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative, people generally agree that preventing this rate increase is an important priority. The difference is, how do we pay for it? The majority leader wants to raise taxes on small business owners. He says that is the better way forward. I disagree. There is a better way forward than raising taxes on the people who create jobs in this country at a time when we have over 8% unemployment, and last month's job numbers are abysmal. Only 125,000 new jobs created, but almost 3 times that many people quit looking for jobs completely. So for every new one job, 3 people quit looking for jobs at all. So to raise taxes on people who are creating jobs in this country is the wrong way to go. Senator Alexander's proposal stops the rate increase, which we all want to do, by eliminating this prevention slush fund. His bill uses the rest of the funding for deficit reduction, and I've co-sponsored that legislation. I think it's also important to know that President Obama, has already agreed to use his slush fund to offset other spending. In September of 2011, the President proposed reducing the slush fund by $3.5 billion. In February, part of the payroll tax cut signed by the President contained a $4.5 billion cut from his slush fund. Finally, in March, the President's 2013 budget proposed cutting the fund by another $5 billion. So it's ironic, Mr. President, that the President of the United States and Washington Democrats now oppose using money from their so-called prevention slush fund. If the White House and Democrats in Congress really want to ensure the student loan rates stay low, they'll cut this wasteful program and use the money to help the next generations of Americans. What we do know is that young people coming out of college today are, on average, having a debt of about $25,000. And whether the interest rate is 0 or 3.4 or 6.8, they are still coming out with a huge debt at a time when we know 53% of people coming out of school can't find a job or can't find a job consistent with their level of education. We read that 40% of them are actually going home again to live at home, returning to home instead of going out into the workplace. So it's time to focus on the economy. It's time to focus on getting people back to work, and time to agree that we need to keep the interest rates low, and we ought to pay for it with money that is there, that can easily be used, and we shouldn't be raising taxes on job creators at a time with a country in this sort of economic condition. And so, Mr. President, I continue to come to the floor week after week to talk about findings in the health care law, some things unintended consequences, some things money tucked away for other purposes, because I think it's hard for Americans to ever forget Nancy Pelosi saying, first you have to pass the health care law before you get to find out what's in it. And the more the American people find out what's in it, the less they like it, to the point that most recently 67% of Americans felt that the health care law ought to be found totally or at least partially totally or partially found unconstitutional as the Supreme Court looks to make their ruling in the next weeks and months ahead. This is a health care law that, in my opinion, is bad for patients. It's bad for providers, the nurses and the doctors who take care of those patients, and it's terrible for American taxpayers. And this is a time we need to repeal and replace this health care law, and now there is a way to use one of the provisions within it to fund and make sure that we do not raise interest rates for the students in this country so they can get the education that they need and hopefully find a job and not punish those who are trying to provide those jobs to these graduates. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, what's the parliamentary situation?
It's concerning the motion to proceed,
Fine.
S-2343.
Mr. President, I ask you now, Mr. President, I'd be permitted to proceed as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I do want to speak for a few minutes about our colleague, Senator Lugar. And I would ask that my comments be separated at this point. I want to make a few comments about what the senator from Wyoming was just saying on the health bill, so I'd ask that my comments be separated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, let me just say very quickly, I couldn't disagree more with the senator from Wyoming's comments a moment ago with respect to the health care bill. And in fact, just this morning, we had a meeting with Secretary Kathleen Sebelius, who was outlining to us all of the gains that we are making with respect to health care in America as a result of the legislation. What's really interesting is our colleagues who keep coming to the floor and saying repeal the health care bill, repeal the health care bill, never offer an alternative to Americans. I mean, I hope Americans who are sort of buying into this notion that somehow the health care bill doesn't serve them because they're angry about one thing or another will stop and really take a look at what the health care bill does. Because in point of fact, if you were to repeal the health care bill and they have no alternative to replace it, here are just some of the things that happen. Number one, you immediately add $2 trillion to the deficit of our nation. $2 trillion, bang, done deal. That goes right away because the health care bill is judged by the CBO to reduce the deficit. It has savings, specific savings in it. And if you get rid of it, those savings go away and bang, the deficit goes up. That's number one. Number two, 47 million, 50-some million Americans who have no health care or didn't have it before the bill will return to the status of having no health care. Now, if everybody in America thinks it's better to have 50-some million Americans walking around without health care who walk into a hospital or get hit by a car or have an accident and go to the hospital, they're getting care and everybody's paying for it, but they're paying for it in the most inefficient way possible. And so the burden is being paid for by people who have the health care. It goes into their premiums. It isn't shared by people buying their insurance and sharing the risk of getting sick. So all of a sudden, you get rid of the health care bill, you return America to the days when millions of Americans had no care, and guess what happens when they have no care? They jam the emergency rooms because that's the only place to go to get the care. The emergency room becomes your place of primary care. They don't answer that question. They never deal with reality. They deal with politics and with ideology. And they throw a lot of baloney at people. The fact is that if you got rid of the health care bill, all those people who used to get sick and get a letter from their insurance company saying, gee, sorry to hear you have terminal cancer, but you're not covered. That's what happened all the time in America. People were thrown off of policies they've been paying for years, and all of a sudden they had no coverage. They don't answer that. Then there's another issue, pre-existing conditions. Again and again and again, people would be denied the ability to buy health care coverage because they had a pre-existing condition of some kind. So if 10 years ago you had a cancer, even if you were cured of your cancer, they could either refuse you or charge you a whole higher set of premiums, even though, you were denied coverage. Didn't get it. Women who were pregnant, applying for coverage. Oh, sorry, that's a pre-existing condition. You're pregnant. We're not going to cover that. And so in America, we drove people into poverty for a long period of time because you have to sell your home, you have to sell down everything, you have to become impoverished in order to get to a point where you might be able to get some help. What about kids in school today? Under the health care bill, if you're up until the age of 26, you can now be covered by your parents' program. It's not free, you got to pay for it, but you can be covered by it. That would be eliminated. So all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of people who are automatically eliminated, go out and fight to get insurance in the marketplace. Now, what else happens? Let me tell you what else happens. There are a whole bunch of reforms to the health care system that our friends never talk about. Today, Kathleen Sebelius, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, laid out for us the enormous gains that we are making in Medicare fraud. We're beginning to make huge savings for people. The average senior is now saving over $4,000 on their health care bills because of what's been put in place by the health care bill. There are a whole series of things. I don't have them all here at my disposal now because I wasn't planning to talk about this when I came to the floor. But there are a series of reforms about how we pay hospitals, bundling the payments to a hospital, requiring greater accountability from hospitals. I mean, don't we want greater accountability from hospitals? That will vanish. That will be gone if you do away with the health care bill. We also have greater coordination of care for patients from the beginning of their private care through their admissions into their discharges. What happens today is there's no coordination of that care, and so a lot of people are discharged, and the readmission rate is staggering because there isn't the coordination between their post-operative, post-surgery care and their primary physicians and the hospitals. Now, there are a number of different pilot projects in place to help coordinate that. Similarly, we are coordinating the care of what's called dual eligibles, the people who are eligible for Medicare but also eligible for Medicaid. And that care has not been well coordinated, so we have huge duplication, enormous costs that we don't need, and the results are a waste of money. All of that is being eliminated and or reduced to a significant level. There's so many other examples, Mr. President. Let me give you an example. The senator was talking about wanting to take money out of preventative medicine. Preventative medicine. We are told by the doctors who are the experts who deal with diabetes that if we had early screening, which comes by having health care coverage, we could eliminate an enormous number, maybe as much as $100 billion of surgery costs and dialysis costs as a result of people not discovering that they have this ailment until it's too late for the treatment by the more accessible and easier means, like there's some oral medication and other things you can do to deal with it, but you have to get there at the early stage. If you get there too late, then you wind up having to do amputations of limbs, or you have to wind up on dialysis, all of which are far more expensive. There are also pilot projects in the health care bill for getting people to be able to take care at home and not be forced in to a higher priced care environment like a nursing home or a longer-term care kind of thing, so that they can get the care at home and be in the dignity of their own home and independent and obviously with much less cost. All of those things would be wiped out by this notion that you're just going to kind of get rid of this bill. And what this whole notion is built on was the early negative branding, very effective negative branding that took place, wrapped around the so-called death panels and the other things, none of which are in this legislation. It's not in it. So this is political. That's why they call it Obamacare, not health care. They call it Obamacare to make it a pejorative and to do their best to try to wrap it up in the negativity of the politics in our country today. And it's just it's a tragedy because it doesn't do justice to the kind of thinking that ought to go into and did go into this bill in terms of how do you do things that really create competition in the marketplace and allow people to be able to get better health care. What's astonishing is we spend something like, I think, $15,000 per patient in America. That's, I think, the average cost. There are countries spending half of that. And a lot of countries spending around $11,000 a patient, And, Mr. President, I am sad to say they are getting better health outcomes than we get in the United States of America. The United States of America is not #1 in health outcomes for the money we're spending in the system. And there are a whole lot of reasons for that, and that's part of why this reform is so critical to our country. Now, I could say a lot more about it. I'm not going to say it now. But I think every time we hear from people who are just talking now about how you got to get rid of it, we got to stand up and make it clear to people why this is good. A lot of Americans have not heard enough about how this legislation works for them, works for the country, will improve our system. Is it the cure-all, no pun intended, of the health care system? No, I don't pretend it is. We'll have to do more. We'll have to tweak it. But it's a beginning step with critical components that take 4 and 5, 6 years to put into place so that we can get the full measure of their impact. But I will tell you, Mr. President, we have it in Massachusetts. We have it now. And businesses are not complaining. In fact, we have one of the best economies of any state in the country. I think our unemployment rate is now down around 4.95%, somewhere in that vicinity. So we have this program. We've had it for a few years now. 98.6% of the people in our state are covered. And it's been mandatory since the beginning. And it's working. And it's beginning to bring down costs in the individual marketplace. The premiums have gone down by something like 45, 50%. So I think we have to look at facts, as we do on a whole lot of issues here facing this country today, rather than continue this silly talk past each other, completely contrived political, ideological debate that is calculated to win power and not calculated necessary to serve the best interests of our nation. So I hope we're going to engage on this over these next months, and I look forward to defending this health care bill, because I think this bill is good for America. I think this bill, while it obviously will need some refinement, some changes, some tweaking here and there, has accomplished an enormous amount already and is on track to accomplish an enormous amount going forward. I think the administration has a much better story to tell about it than has been told, and I'm glad the President has said he looks forward to going out and talking to the country about it, because I believe that as the country learns more about it, in fact, they will say, wow, that makes sense. That seems like a pretty sensible thing to do. And our opponents, who want to just get rid of it, have an absolute obligation to put the full deal on the table about what they're going to do in return. Not just Medicare with the Ryan proposal, which you know, makes it more expensive for seniors and undoes Medicare as we know it. Not just that part of it, but the whole part of it. How are they going to cover the uninsured? What are they going to do to take care of all those medical institutions that are struggling to teach for the doctors of the future? How are they going to hold those folks in a way that continues medical education in our country, and so forth? They owe it to the nation to answer those questions. So, Mr. President, that concludes the portion of my remarks that I just wanted to make in response to the Senator. And now, in the separate portion, I wanted to take and share a few thoughts this morning, not about the results per se of the election last night in Indiana, but I do want to talk about the consequences for the United States Senate of the loss of Senator Lugar as of next year, and particularly for the Foreign Relations Committee. It's no secret that Dick Lugar's loss last night is going to be particularly felt by all of us who've had the privilege of working with him on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And that's whether he was the chairman of the committee, and I've served under him when he was chairman, or whether he's been a member of the committee and the ranking member as he is now, and as I'm privileged to serve with him. Whether you agreed with him or not, whether he had the gavel or whether he didn't have the gavel, Dick Lugar had an approach to the Senate and to governing that was always the same. He was serious, he was thoughtful, and he refused to allow this march to an orthodoxy about ideology and partisan politics to get in the way of what he thought was the responsibility of a senator, and indeed the need of the country to have people come together and find the common ground. He dug deeply into some of foreign policy's most vexing issues, and his expertise on complicated issues that were honed over 36 years really can't be replicated. That's something we're going to lose. The institutional experience, the judgment, and the wisdom of the approach on some of those issues, the constitutional questions that he would call into account when no one else would, the questions of not being stampeded by popular opinion with respect to the use of force in one instance or another. All of those are essential to making this institution live up to its full capacity. Now, already since last night's news, we've been hearing again and again on some of the news shows and elsewhere about the senator from Indiana's work on nuclear nonproliferation. And it's no secret that his Nunn-Lugar efforts have become almost shorthand for bipartisanship in foreign policy, and they should be recognized. But I want to emphasize here now that's not all that Senator Lugar contributed to this field of foreign policy. He's a leading expert on some of the urgent issues that are off the beaten path, from food security, the eradication of hunger worldwide, his work with Joe Biden, and then his work, I'm privileged to say, with me to try to change the relationship with Pakistan and to help prevent their economy from unraveling, to help to encourage them to cooperate with interests that were vital to America and indeed to the stability of that region, to establish what he called a deeper, broader, long-term strategic engagement in Pakistan. I'm privileged to say, Mr. President, for me, the personal journey with Dick Lugar began before that, and I think it epitomizes some of who he is and why he'll be missed here. It has nothing to do with ideology. Back in 1980s, shortly after I came here, I was elected in 1984, and I started on the Foreign Relations Committee in 1985. Right away, we began to work together on the issue of the Philippines, of free and fair elections in the Philippines. And I had traveled over there a number of times as a freshman senator. I had met with Ferdinand Marcos. I was concerned about the torture taking place and the political prisoners and other violations of rights, and yet we were sort of aiding them, notwithstanding our values and our standards. Well, Dick Lugar joined with me in that effort. Didn't have any reason to join with a, freshly minted senator, wet behind the ears, but he did. And together we sort of became a team that started to focus on the Philippines and figure out how do we hold Marcos accountable. And he was serious and he was fair-minded, and I saw firsthand during our trip to the Philippines, which we made at the time of the election after we'd done a whole lot of groundwork to set up an accountability system for that election, that he had a very personal and special understanding of what the United States meant to the rest of the world with respect to our values. And that cause animated this man who we all know is dignified and reserved and humble, but who proudly came back and recounted with some animation to President Reagan the difference that the United States of America makes when it gives voice to people's aspirations for freedom, and in this case particularly the people of the Philippines. The fact is that it was that discussion with Ronald Reagan and the results that came out of the accountability in that election that forced Ferdinand Marcos to leave, saw Cory Aquino come to power, and the Philippines move back into genuine democracy. I saw the same commitment with Senator Lugar a number of times over the years, but never more so than last year when we worked together on the New START Treaty. That was 2 years ago, I guess now. His wisdom and his patience was invaluable in laying out the case, but particularly in building support across the aisle so that we could find the path to 71 votes. And I said then, and I say it again today, given the bitter, divisive, partisan, continual political squabbling that seems to dominate the life in this city today, 71 votes is probably the equivalent of the 98 votes we used to get on those kinds of efforts. And so I'm grateful to him for his willingness to work to do that. He worked to give members more time to work through problems, to find a way to solve individual objections, and it reminded me of the way you actually work in what is now sometimes, unfortunately, sarcastically referred to as the world's greatest deliberative body. He deliberated, and he helped us deliberate. And I thought it was one of the finer and prouder moments of the Senate in recent years. Mr. President, I am confident that Dick Lugar's record on our committee is going to be one of those that's remembered for a long time. Sadly, last night, it is remembered in the context of Senator Fulbright, who also came to lose a primary in the end and paid a high price for his concern about global affairs and his involvement with those issues. But I think that he's also remembered significantly today for the enormous legacy that he built about American foreign policy and how you make our country stronger. Dick Lugar does that, and I think he's made it clear. I mean, there's no doubt in the mind of anybody on our side of the aisle that Dick Lugar is a conservative. And his votes through the years have shown that. He's a proud Republican. But I think probably because he served as a mayor before he came here, he applied what we call the LaGuardia rule to foreign policy, which is the rule that Fiorello LaGuardia applied to doing things in New York. So it didn't matter, whether you were Republican or Democrat, as long as the streets got clean, the potholes got filled, and they didn't have any labels on them. And that's pretty much the way the foreign policy ought to be. It used to be under Arthur Vandenberg that we said that politics ends at the water's edge, and we do what's in the best interest of our country. Only in the last years here in the Senate have I seen a complete diversion from that, where, unfortunately, and it's been true on both sides, that politics has entered into the choices people have made with respect to major issues of conflict, potential war and peace, and interests of the security of our country. So, about 4 years ago this time, Dick Lugar received the Paul Douglas Award just off the Senate floor over in the Mansfield room. And he summed up his approach to the Senate. And I think after last night, it's important for all of our colleagues to be mindful of his words and to think about them as we go forward in these next 6, 7, 8 months. Dick argued that bipartisanship isn't an end in itself, and it's sometimes mistaken for centrism and compromise, when in fact it's really the way that what he called being a constructive public servant. It's the way a constructive public servant approaches his or her job, with self-reflection, discipline, and faith in the goodwill of others. He said, particularly destructive is the misperception in some quarters that governing with one vote more than 50% is just as good or better than government with 60 or 70% support. The problem with this thinking, he said, is that whatever is won today through division is usually lost tomorrow. The relationships that are destroyed and the ill will that is created to make subsequent achievements that much more difficult. A 51% mentality deepens cynicism, sharpens political vendettas, and depletes the national reserve of goodwill that is critical to our survival in hard times. Now, that's actually about as fundamentally, philosophically, as conservative, I think, as you could ask for. Now, I think every one of us who has seen the difficulty of the last few years of our politics here, who have been frustrated by the sheer inability of the institution to work, would agree that there's nothing liberal or conservative or moderate about what Dick said. It's just common sense about how human nature works, about how people work. And, Mr. President, it seems to me that we would do well to get back in touch. I often hear people talk about how we need to change the rules here in order to get something done. Actually, we don't. These are the same rules that we operated with when Everett Dirksen was here, when Bob Dole was leader, George Mitchell was leader, but we got things done. In the 1990s, we balanced the budget of our nation 4 times in a row without a constitutional amendment. It didn't take a piece of paper to tell us to do it, or new words written in the Constitution. It took the common sense and courage of people on the floor of the Senate to do what was right. We don't have to change the rules, we have to change the thinking, or change the people who don't want to do it. But every great moment of this institution, when people look back in history with pride and point to the Missouri Compromise or point to Henry Clay or Daniel Webster, or all these great senators, or Ted Kennedy more recently, and others on the other side of the aisle. When they do that, they're talking about people who operated by the same rules but found the common ground because they had the intelligence and willpower to put the country and its interests ahead of everything else. So that's what Dick Lugar's loss last night means to us. I don't know who will replace him. We don't know. We certainly know the cross currents of some of the campaign. And we certainly know what Senator Lugar himself chose to say last night about his opponent's quest for more partisanship, not less. So the alarm bells have been sounded, I think. And my prayer is that this election this year is going to help purge this country of this incredible waste of opportunity that we are living through here. Now, this Congress isn't over. And for those of us who were here and remember 1996, it bears repeating that even in presidential years, the Congress can actually defy conventional wisdom and get some things done. And that's why I know that Dick Lugar is going to finish out his 6th term in the Senate with the same determination and effectiveness that has marked every year of his service here, and he's going to have a lot more contributions to this institution that he reveres and I think that respects him so enormously. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, first I want to thank my colleague and friend, Senator Kerry, Chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, for coming to the Senate floor and speaking about our mutual friend and colleague, Senator Dick Lugar, who serves as the ranking Republican on that Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I'm a newcomer to that committee, but I'm not a newcomer to my knowledge of Dick Lugar. It preceded my arrival in the Senate 16 years ago, when he was well known throughout the Midwest for his extraordinary service as mayor of Indianapolis, where he did something that was miraculous. He combined and made more efficient local units of government. And I think the rebirth of Indianapolis is attributed to those early steps by Dick Lugar. Loretta, my wife, and I came to know Dick and Char personally through the Aspen Institute, which is an effort that I think we need to encourage, where members of both political parties, House and Senate, come together to discuss foreign policy issues. No lobbyists, no special interest. Dick Lugar was there and always a major contributor when it came to issues of importance. Before I arrived in the Senate, while you were still here, Senator Kerry, he teamed up with Senator Sam Nunn to deal with an issue that related literally to the peace and security of the world. What would happen as the Soviet Union crumbled to all of those nuclear weapons? Would they fall in the wrong hands? Would they fall into disrepair? And what could we do about it? It was Sam Nunn and Dick Lugar who stepped up and said, we're going to work together on a bipartisan basis to deal with that. Time and time again throughout his career, Dick Lugar has really focused on issues of strategic importance to the United States and its security. And I can't agree with Senator Kerry more. He looked for a bipartisan approach to so many things. We always knew he was a Hoosier conservative. You weren't going to push over anything when it came to Dick Lugar. He was strong in his values, but he always listened, and he was always, always a gentleman, always. What a disappointment last night. I know Senator Kerry feels as I do that once you've been in this chamber for a few years, you kind of reflect on those lions of the Senate who have come and gone, some because of the decision of the electorate, and some because of the passage of time and then fateful decisions that ended up with their departure. We think back on some of these great people. John Chafee. John Chafee and Dick Lugar were soulmates in terms of their view on the Republican side of the aisle about how you work across the aisle to get things done. Our mutual friend, and I know your personal, close personal friend, Senator Kennedy. Senator Kennedy's success has always reached across the aisle. I noticed that. And sometimes to the frustration of those on the Democratic side who said, we've got enough votes, Ted, we don't have to do this. He would reach across. Bob Byrd, who used to sit right next to where Senator Kerry's sitting now. You think, what will the Senate be like without these great lions? Well, the Senate will go on. But the question is, will we have learned from their example? Will we take their life and their career and build on it to make this a better place? Or, as some have said, are we going to succumb to the temptation of just making this place more partisan, more hidebound, more dedicated to obstruction than moving forward? I know that Dick Lugar in the remaining months is going to be an extraordinary servant of the people of Indiana and the nation as he has been throughout his career. And I look forward to seeing him here back on the Senate floor working as he will for the remainder of his term. But it is a loss. It's a loss to the Senate that he's leaving. And it's a sad day on both sides of the aisle that Dick Lugar won't be part of the future of the Senate in person. But he can add to the Senate and what it can bring. I'd like to speak about another Republican senator while I have the floor. My colleague, Mark Kirk. Some of you have seen the video. Mark had a stroke in January. He wrote about it this morning's Chicago Tribune. 52 years of age, the picture of health, a Navy Reserve officer, a United States Senator from Illinois, actively engaged in our state, going back and forth, county to county, city to city. We worked together on so many things, and then on that fateful day, he was stricken, and with this stroke, suffered some very serious damage. I was a little bit disturbed when his surgeon came out and said, well, here's what we can expect. You know, and I'm not going to go through the graphic details, but they were all sobering to think that he would be limited in any way by the stroke. And I was upset because I thought, he doesn't know Mark Kirk. That isn't going to happen. Mark is going to fight back. He is going to be back. And he is going to defy the odds in terms of stroke victims. Yesterday he released a video. It is inspiring, and I hope that everyone gets a chance to see it. I'm sure it's readily available, showing him going through rehab, showing the efforts that he's making to come back to the United States Senate. Mark called me earlier this week. We've talked on the phone a couple times since his stroke. He's been actively engaged mentally in everything that we've done since the stroke occurred. But every day he tells me that he spends on a treadmill, you know, miles and miles of walking on a treadmill so he'll be able to come back. I told him we're on a different treadmill here, and I'm sure he wants to get back on it with us in the United States Senate. But he will be back, and he said something that I think we all ought to remember. He said he asked his staff to count the steps from where he would park outside the Senate chamber up to the Senate chamber. They counted the steps, and they told him 45 steps, and he'd be back in the Senate. And he said the day is going to come, and I'm sure it will be soon, when he will walk those steps, and there will be many, myself included, from both sides of the aisle, cheering his return to the United States Senate. So for Mark, his family, his doctors, medical staff, and all, thank you for this battle. Thank you for your efforts on behalf of our state. We look forward to your early return. Mark and I have a joint town meeting, Republican and Democrat, every Thursday morning, and the people sit there politely as we discuss issues and just love it when we disagree, because we do it without getting angry with one another. He'll be back soon, not only at those meetings, but also covering the state of Illinois as an effective, engaged United States Senator. Mr. President, I would like to make the following request on floor privileges. Mr. Reed or his designee on behalf of Senator Cardin. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that floor privileges be granted to Carolyn Goodbody and Amanda Mendoza, two of Senator Cardin's legislative staff members during today's session.
Without objection.
And, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the time from 2 p.m. until 5 p.m. be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, and that all quorum calls in that period also be equally divided.
Without objection.
I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I take this time to urge my colleagues to allow us to move forward on the consideration of the Stop the Student Loan Rate Hike Act so that we can allow the interest rates on student loans to remain at its current level rather than doubling, which will happen on July 1st, unless we take action. Mr. President, I come to the floor to express the views of many Marylanders who I have talked to about the cost of higher education. We cannot allow the interest cost to go up. It will affect 7 million students and their families. We already have too much college debt that families have to incur as a result of the cost of college education. We are not competitive with the rest of the world. We look at countries that we compete with, and we look at the cost of higher education in their country, compare it to what our students have to endure. We start off behind because of the enormous cost to a family to be able to afford a college education for their children. We know how important it is. You need to have a college degree in order to be competitive in many fields today, and that number of fields are increasing every day. Well, let me tell you, we have crossed the $1 trillion mark in debt held by families in order to afford a college education. 2/3 of that debt are held by people who are under 30 years of age. Here they are trying to start out in life, trying to have a family, trying to buy a home, trying to do things, and they start off with this large amount of debt. College debt now exceeds credit card debt in America. It's not unusual for a person graduating from a college to have $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 in debt, and even higher. If we do not act by July 1st, the interest costs will add thousands of dollars to that already burdensome amount. Cost of college education in America is too expensive. If we want to be competitive, we've got to get the cost of college education down. The President, in his State of the Union address, talked about ways in which we can encourage colleges and universities to be more affordable for the American public. But one thing that we can do is to make sure that the cost of borrowing is not increased. That's why it's particularly important that we pass this legislation. It is affecting families' decisions as to what schools children will attend because of the high cost. We are just turning our economy around, starting to make our recovery, and now families are struggling to figure out how they're going to be able to afford college education. We need to reduce the cost, not increase the cost to the families. We need a trained workforce. We need to be competitive internationally. Let me tell you one other thing that it's affecting. We have some very talented people who are graduating from college, and they want to go into the field that they believe they're gifted in, where they can make a real contribution to our community, our society, to make a difference, to answer that call of community service. That's what they want to do. But then when they're saddled with this much debt, and if it becomes more expensive to pay off of that debt, they have to make a pragmatic decision about their career path rather than following where they believe they can make the greatest contribution to society. That's what these large debts and the cost of paying off the debt is affecting our country. You might have a great researcher, Mr. President, who can find the answer to one of our diseases as to how we can keep healthier society. A person may want to go into research, but they know what the return of research will be on trying to pay off their college loans. And now, if we don't act by July the 1st, that will even be larger. That's what we're confronting. And that's why it's so urgent. That's why we need to be considering this legislation rather than stuck in this filibuster. I urge my colleagues, let's move forward. Let's be able to do what the Senate should do. Consider amendments. Let's move forward. Let's get this process going. I tell you, it is absolutely critical to our entire country, but let me talk a little bit about my experiences with Marylanders. I've traveled the state of Maryland. I've talked to a lot of our college students, and I'll generally talk about a lot of different subjects and then ask what's on their mind. And invariably, they'll talk about the cost of college education. They'll talk about the fact that we need more grants. They'll talk about the fact that we need more affordable loans. And they certainly will tell me that if you're going to increase the interest cost on their loans, it's going to have a major impact on their ability to stay in college, on their ability to follow the career choices that they want to in life. Let me just share with my colleagues two of Marylanders who have contacted my office, who have contacted me in the last few days to tell me that this bill that we are hopefully going to be able to consider will have a direct impact on their decision. Catherine Ames is a 22-year-old single mother to 4-year-old son, Jaden. Catherine has recently decided to go back to college to pursue her nursing degree and currently attends Hagerstown Community College in Hagerstown, Maryland. She is attempting to make a better future for herself and for her son. She is attempting, she is going to be a full-time student. Catherine also works part-time at a minimum wage job, all while juggling her responsibilities as a single mother. Student loans are necessary. She needs to take out student loans. That's the only way that she is able to afford her college is by taking out loans. So she has student loans in order to be able to stay afloat and realize her dream of making a better future for herself and her son. If student loan interest rates were to double, Catherine would be in a financial turmoil and her future aspirations in jeopardy. Let me quote from Catherine. This is what she says. And I think it's so telling, and I hope my colleagues are listening. I want to be able to close my eyes and see a bright future for my family and my son. However, if these interest rates increase, all I see from this point forward is a hole. I don't think I'll ever be able to climb out of it. I know to some of my colleagues, they say, what are we talking about, another 3% interest charges, people will be able to afford it. But let me tell you about the real world. Let me tell you about the world of Catherine Ames. That's the real world. That's people who are making career decisions now as to whether they're going to follow their dream or not, whether she's going to become a nurse and be able to help our community, help her family, and help herself. And if we don't make college affordable, if we add additional cost to it, we're going to lose more people in this process. And as a society, as America, our competitiveness will all suffer as a result of it. We need to do better. We need to pass this legislation to help the Catherine Ames that are out there. Let me talk about another Marylander, Ariana Fisher, who wants to be a doctor. She wanted to be a doctor since she was 5 years of age. Through hard work and determination, she's been accepted to Georgetown University's medical school. Attending will require her to take out a significant amount of student loans. That's the facts. For most American families, they have to take out loans if they're going to be able to reach their dreams. She already knows how much this is going to cost, but she says compounding this with an increase in interest rates hinders her ability to pursue her dream. She has the will and passion to become an excellent physician, and her aspirations should not rest on what we do here in making it more economically difficult for her to be able to afford that education that will not only benefit her, but will benefit our community. Mr. President, we are talking about our children. We are talking about whether our children are going to be able to pursue the American dream, whether they're going to have the education they need to be able to help themselves and help our country. We are talking about America's future. This is about whether this nation is going to be able to continue to lead the world in economic growth. We need to take up the Stop the Student Loan Rate Hike Act that is currently pending. But let me just explain, it's subject to a filibuster. Yes, it's a filibuster. We tried to say, let's at least get on the bill, which required 60 votes in order to be able to break this filibuster. And we came up short. I hope the majority leader will schedule another vote shortly, and I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will remember what this means for the future of this country. The stories that I related in regards to Catherine Ames or Ariana Fisher are not unique. I'm certain you would find similar examples in New Mexico or in any other state in this country. You're going to find similar examples of people who desperately need us to act so the college costs do not increase. And then let's work together to bring down the cost of college education. College and post-secondary education is a vital gateway to helping Marylanders and students around the country achieve the American dream. We need to stand up for our nation's future. We cannot allow higher education to become unaffordable for millions of Americans who have the desire and the ability to learn and succeed. Let's end the filibuster. Let's work together as Democrats and Republicans. Let's keep our future, America's future in mind. Let's keep the American dream in mind. Let's allow Americans to be able to reach that dream by making college education affordable. Let us pass the legislation that is currently pending that would stop the increase in the interest rates on college loans. With that, Mr. President, I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.